us for this afternoon's session. This afternoon, we'll be hearing from a special keynote speaker, followed by a fantastic panel discussing pathways to decarbonization. Again, if you have any questions for our speakers this afternoon, both sessions will be using the Q&A, and we encourage you to reach out with your questions. Now I'd like to welcome our session sponsor, CLAC, to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker.
Hello, my name is Ryan Bruce. I'm CLAC's BC Manager of Government Relations. I'm addressing you today from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people and the ancestral home of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations. It's great to be here participating again at this year's BC Natural Resource Forum, although I'd much prefer to be standing in front of you live right now after having had a chance to connect face-to-face with acquaintances and old friends and colleagues in the corridor. If you've attended this forum in Prince George live in the past, you will know the energy this conference creates. The corridor is lined with organizations led by individuals with vision and passion for their field, each one of them looking for new, innovative ways to participate in many of BC's natural resource sectors, collectively driving our province's economy, creating family-supporting jobs for members of Indigenous communities, minority groups, and women and men. As a representative for CLAC, a progressive union representing thousands of workers across many sectors of our economy, I have seen firsthand the positive impact to the lives of our members who have found employment on many of the projects that have been discussed right here at this forum. From Site C to TMX, the Coastal GasLink, and LNG Canada, just to name a few. On behalf of CLAC members whose lives have benefited from employment on these projects, and many others as a result of those of you who have led your organizations and created the partnerships needed to get through all the government red tape and permits and protests and market fluctuations, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your vision and the tenacity and the leadership that was required to see these projects through to where they are today. And now it is my honor to introduce one of these leaders, a woman who is no stranger to this stage, a woman who embodies the very qualities I spoke of. From my vantage point, Susannah Pierce seems to have found a harmonious balance between a corporate boardroom charged with overseeing a project with a size and scope never seen before in Canada, and the partnership she's established with communities based on trust and a genuine desire and commitment to help improve the lives of the people she's built a relationship with. She has shown us a new way of doing business, one where people can be at the heart of decision-making, while at the same time creating the confidence needed for investors to support large-scale resource-based projects. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Susannah Pierce, President and Country Chair and General Manager of Renewables Energy Solutions at Shell Canada.
Good afternoon. Can I just check, can folks hear me okay? I'm having trouble having any feedback. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then hopefully we can get some of this corrected. Wonderful to be here with you. I'm calling in today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I would just like to say that it's with regret that we can't convene together up in Prince George in the traditional territory of the Lady Tenay. I have so many fond memories of being at the BC Natural Resources Forum, and it's too bad that this year it didn't work out, but I'm definitely looking forward to future years where I can be there in person. So it's a privilege also to come back in my new role as Shell Canada Country Chair. It's a position that gives me a great opportunity to see across all the various businesses that we have in Canada. And it also gives me a new perspective also in terms of where we will go as Shell Canada. So today I'm going to share with you our perspective as a company on how we intend to reach net zero. So when I started at Shell more than a decade ago, our footprint in Canada looked a lot different than it does today. Our Canadian portfolio has tracked with Shell's global strategy over the years. In fact, all of Shell's global lines of business are here in Canada, from upstream, which we see here in groundworks, to chemicals and manufacturing, to retail, which is the station that you will pull your car or truck up to fill up, to integrated gas, which is our LNG business, to now renewables and energy solutions, which is an area I also have some business responsibility in terms of finding new business opportunities. The Powering Progress strategy was announced just last year around this time, and it's focused on 4 pillars. Generating shareholder value, which is all about making sure that we generate the right amount of cash flows to sustain our existing business, but then also to build our new business. It's about powering lives, which is how we will make sure that our energy resources enable people to benefit from energy that is affordable and accessible, but that also takes another step forward with respect to inclusiveness, and Indigenous reconciliation is key to that in the Canadian context. It's about respecting nature with the understanding that our nature is exhaustible and we need to be working to protect nature, to avoid impacts to nature where we can. And when we do impact it, to make sure that we're compensating for those impacts, because we know we pretty much can't do anything without some impact on nature, but we need to make sure that it is in balance. And becoming by 2050 a net zero emissions energy business in step with society. Now, what does becoming a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 really mean? Well, it means net zero emissions when we produce and process energy, and net zero emissions when people use the energy we sell. And that's a key differentiator, I would say, for many companies or organizations that talk about net zero. We're not only talking about net zero of the emissions which we have greater control over, we're talking about the emissions of our customers. That's you. That's your scope 1 emissions. And so we're talking about how we work with you and big companies and organizations to reduce their emissions. So to understand how best to address our emissions, we first need to know how much we are generating and where these emissions come from. Shell defines and measures its emissions as scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So what are scope 1 emissions? Well, they are the direct emissions from all of our operations, which includes oil and gas exploration, production, processing, refining, and chemicals production. Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions. So the emissions from energy we buy to run our operations, such as electricity, steam, heat, and cooling. And finally, scope 3. These are our customers' emissions, primarily from the use of the energy products we sell, but also the life cycle emissions of energy products that we buy from others and then sell to our customers. This is significant because the emissions from the end use of our products, when you run them in your car, when they are run in factories, account for 90% of our total emissions. And so by addressing the emissions of our customers, not only what we produce, but what we sell, we really have one of the most comprehensive targets in the energy industry. And when you think about it, at the most largest scale, Shell actually provides just under 5% of the world's energy consumption. So in my view, we're either 5% of the problem or we're 5% of the solution in terms of the ability to really work to change the energy system. And I believe that we are the latter. Now, becoming net zero means avoiding emissions by being more efficient at our operations, delivering lower carbon energy products, and capturing and storing any remaining emissions using technologies such as CCUS or nature-based systems as a last resort. It also means transforming our business and seeking out opportunities to provide more low carbon energy to our customers, such as first and second generation biofuels, hydrogen, electric vehicle charging, and electricity generated by solar and wind power, all of which are resources and technology that can be produced or installed here in BC. Now, as Shell works with our customers to identify the best paths to decarbonization, we seek to avoid reducing, then only mitigate any remaining emissions. We have 6 levers that we've identified to really help us do that. And we've also set short, medium, and long-term targets. One of the levers that I think is particularly relevant for our conversation in British Columbia is, of course, natural gas. We believe that Shell's oil production peaked in 2019, and it is expected to decline 1% to 2% a year until 2030, with no new frontier exploration until post-2025. We expect, though, that the percentage of total gas production in our portfolio to gradually rise to 55% or more by 2030. And this is primarily due to natural gas's role to balance the intermittency of renewables until adequate battery storage is available, but also because it is being used as a lower carbon fuel for industrial and commercial heat applications, as well as transportation in other jurisdictions. In Canada, our shales business has been on a journey to mitigating the social and environmental impact of our operations, and we need to keep doing this. We recognize that to realize greater GHG emissions benefits, the natural gas industry must increase its focus on reducing methane emissions, full stop, across the value chain. And so Shell has already established a pretty aggressive methane intensity target for oil and gas below 0.2% by 2025. This is the threshold our Groundbridge asset already beats, and we have reduced GHG emissions there already by 25% over the past 6 years. Therefore, the gas we produce by the middle of this decade will have an even lower carbon footprint than it does today. And we'll continue to innovate and we'll continue to build on this success, implementing emissions reductions projects as much as we can. A great example of this, in fact, that the team is very proud of is our 5-year initiative to remove methane venting equipment from some of our legacy well pads and retrofit them with electric non-venting equipment. This is something that is available to the industry. And again, solving the methane problem is absolutely crucial if we're going to solve our climate challenge. Now, many of you are already aware that the regulator has strict regulations to limit methane emissions by 2025, and we can expect a stronger commitment for methane against methane under the Clean BC roadmap. And we look forward to working on those as well. And now, to the extent our natural resources, and I'm sure many of you who know me have heard me say this before, but the extent to which our natural resources, our technologies, our regulatory experience can enable global nations meet their climate targets as their economies grow and their energy consumption increases by displacing more carbon-intensive forms of energy used in heating, industrial process, and transportation, we should seize that opportunity, as these exports drive local investment, jobs, revenues to governments, and Indigenous communities, which in turn can actually help us accelerate decarbonization with new technologies and economic reconciliation. The principle is also based on the reality that even as we meet our own climate targets at home, and we need to do that, we will not be successful in combating climate change unless the largest and fastest growing emitters of the world have the resources to act. Now, what we need to do as part of this conversation or this discussion is ensure that when we do export these technologies, they are in fact having that impact. And that is where things like Article 6 can come in. Now, when we think about examples of where this could happen, LNG Canada, of course, is one right here at home. It was designed to have the lowest carbon intensity of any large LNG facility operating in the world. Now, to ensure it remains a top performer, we must continue to look at ways of decarbonizing the entire value chain. That is from production in Northeast BC all the way to consumption in Asia. And we do that through collaboration with participants along that value chain, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, and of course in concert with policymakers, governments, which can really help us accelerate decarbonization each step of the way. And so let me pause for a minute also to just express my thanks to each of you that supported or are working on LNG Canada, all the way from Fort St. John, Dawson Creek to Terrace and Kitimat, to all of the First Nations along the pipeline from the Northeast to the coast, to the thousands of men and women who are actually working on site as I speak. Delivering a project of this complexity and magnitude has not and is not easy. And certainly living in a pandemic makes this even more challenging. But the project has passed the midway point of construction. And in fact, the most intensive construction on site is to come. So we need to work together to make this a success. And I know that it's your support that made it happen. It's your support that'll get it to the finish line. And while it may not always have been easy, and there's been lots of ups and downs along the road, I know that when the first gas leaves that port, we'll have something to be very proud of. So in my new role, I'm often asked about the energy transition and what it means for Canada. Well, that can be and should be a very long answer. And it is certainly not a simple answer, like flipping a switch, where all of a sudden we can eliminate oil and gas that fuels our homes, our cars, our trucks, industry, and our buildings. But we also know that the longer we take to take action on climate, the longer it takes for us to actually implement the things that can improve energy efficiency. I'm afraid the more drastic policy measures will be to come. And I also am concerned that we'll miss the opportunities that will drive future investment through decarbonization projects, technologies, and value chains that are here in BC. So indeed, while we must continue to produce the energy the world needs today, we do have the ingredients here in BC to design and deliver lower carbon projects and pathways that we need and the world needs. All it takes, and we've had this experience before, is our collective commitment and an understanding that while it may not be easy or perfect, it will certainly be something that our children will be proud of when they ask us, what did we do to maintain a strong and inclusive economy that mitigated the worst impacts of climate change? What we can say is we rose to that challenge, we worked together, we overcame our differences, and we did our best. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Susannah. We really appreciate you taking the time to provide those remarks today. I've got one question that's come in from the audience. We do have a few moments here. And, on your pathway to lowering emissions and decarbonization, the question is Shell looking at biofuel?
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. I think when we think about the targets of the Paris Agreement, which again, Shell has designed its net zero strategy to meet, biofuels, renewable fuels, low carbon and zero carbon fuels are a key component of that. And the reason for it is that you can't electrify everything. And in fact, when you look at the harder to abate sectors, that can include things like aviation, shipping, they can't necessarily use electricity. So we need to find other sources of energy for those industries and those sectors. Heavy duty, medium duty, long haul trucking is another great example. So biofuels are a key component of that. Another great example of potential here in BC. Waste to energy as well. There's lots of examples of where we can actually use waste that can not be recycled and turn that into fuels. That's a circular economy for us. So yes, huge potential there.
That's great. Thank you. One last question for you. From some of your earlier comments, you mentioned the need for collaboration with government, and just wondering if you had any quick thoughts on or specific ideas or examples of where you might see that opportunity.
Yeah, I think the first thing to think about with government is comprised of people, and people at the end of the day don't have all the answers. None of us do. But if we have a shared commitment of where we'd like to go, and I think all of us as human beings share the values that we'd like to make sure that we're safe, that we have food for our families, that we have an income, that we can afford to live, that if we share those certain things, we can work together with government to say, well, how do we get there? And I think increasingly, we do share a commitment that we want to make sure that we address the worst impacts of climate. And I think that there's lots of strategies out there to do it. What we have to do as participants, is actually come to government and say, well, here's some ideas, here's some solutions, here's how we knit it together. That's been the success and experience in getting LNG Canada across the line. And I see the same thing for a lot of these great opportunities that, again, can be made in BC, whether that is things like biofuels, whether that is things like bioenergy, carbon capture sequestration, which frankly, I think is quite exciting, whether that is hydrogen, blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, or as Minister Wilkinson increasingly says, low carbon hydrogen. We can do all of this, and what we need to do is work together and define how we get there, and governments can help us do that, in addition to each of us as participants.
Well, that's fantastic. And that is a great lead in to our next panel session of the day. So first, thank you so much, Susannah. We really appreciate your support and Shell's involvement and your longstanding participation in the forum. So thanks again, and we will see you in Prince George next year. So that concludes... Thanks. That concludes our keynote address. So please return to the agenda and select the next session to view the live stream, which is Panel 3, Pathways to Decarbonization, sponsored by Petronas. And don't forget to have your questions ready to input into Huva. Thanks very much.